The female lead tells women's stories. Remarkable, diverse, inspiring. An educational charity promoting positive female role models who show the many different routes to success and fulfillment.
So often I hear people saying, oh, how do I get started? How do I do this? How do you do it? You just start. You have to begin. And it won't be perfect, and it'll be messy, and it'll be hard. But you're doing something, and you're on your way.
Empowering future generations of women through films. And a book of 60 women donated to 18,000 schools in the UK and USA, reaching millions of young people. And through our female lead societies, we help girls to discover new role models that speak to their passions, ambitions and careers. Through our research into social media and mental health, we found a solution to the negative impact of social media on teen girls. Through a simple intervention which encouraged girls to follow different influencers, we were able to change their entire social media experience and sense of well-being. We called this campaign Disrupt Your Feed, and it reached 20 million people on social, with 330 million impressions all over the globe. So what's next? As well as inspiring girls, we're now finding ways to measurably improve the lives of older women through data, research, and the stories of those who have overcome challenges and found their own personal versions of success. We're a long way from being finished. Join us in our mission.
Are we going to talk about women's rights again? Yes, we're going to talk about it until there's balance.
Hello everyone, welcome to our LinkedIn Live. I'm Edwina Dunn, I'm the founder of The Female Lead, and I am very excited to have the amazing Professor Ian Robertson with me to talk about a subject that I know we're all interested in and we all want to be, I think, better at. And I think he's going to help us to understand how. Before I introduce him, I just want to say two things. One is that, we will hopefully have time for questions at the end. So I know you don't hold back, so please do share your questions online and we will get to them as soon as we're able. But we are going to talk about a fairly new and, for me, very interesting area. So please do remember and send your questions in. Okay, so let me tell you about Ian Robertson. He is a clinical psychologist and neuroscientist. And what I really love when I first met Ian is that he's able to turn this very, very clever science and research to address real world problems. He's currently co-director of the Global BrainHealth Institute, and he's Emeritus Professor at Trinity College, Dublin. He is widely recognised as one of the world's leading researchers in neuropsychology. Exciting, I think. Anyway, he's produced and just published a brand new book, and it's all about how confidence works, the new science of self-belief, and very importantly, why some people learn it and others don't. And I think that's what we're all here to understand. So, welcome, Professor Ian Robertson. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Edwina, it's delightful to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, well, I mean, we're fascinated. We want to learn from you. So perhaps we can start with maybe the biggest question, but hopefully an easy one for you. What drove you to write this book, and why is confidence so important to all of us?
So my wife, Fiona Doherty, who's a brilliant clinical psychologist, when we first met, she said, talking about children, she said, if you can give a child confidence, almost nothing else matters. And when I think back to my own childhood, I remember particularly adolescence, I wasn't a confident child. But as I became privileged, male, middle class, relatively successful, white, you become blind, really, to the role of confidence and to what it's like not to have it. So Fiona, my wife, said to me 3 years ago, you should write a book on confidence. I've written several books. You need to write one on confidence. It's critical. So I started to look at the science of confidence, and I really was dumbstruck, particularly when it came to the role of confidence in women and girls versus men and boys. I just was so taken aback. I ended up writing 2 big chapters in the book just on that. And so I then when talking about confidence, I realized the more privileged socioeconomically, the more privileged racially, the more privileged in terms of occupation, etc., and the more man you are, the more likely it is that you don't realize how important confidence is. It's when you talk to women, when you talk to girls, when you talk to people lower down the social strata, when you talk to people from different racial groups, confidence is huge. And it's huge because it's the most valuable thing you can have in terms of success in life.
Well, that is one very, very powerful statement. And I think it's why our audience, all these women around the world, want to know, what do they have to do to be more confident? And you and I have talked a bit, because your book is so jammed with interesting concepts and ideas. We've reduced this talk to 4 key elements. So we're going to step through these, because I want people to hear what I heard and to learn what I learned. And so I would like you to introduce these 4 to us. We're going to start with the first one, which is essentially, why do women appear not to be as confident as men? What's going on? It's the appearance of not being confident.
So what's at the heart here is women appear less confident than men, in part because they are more realistic in their self-appraisals. Men tend to be overconfident. They tend to slightly oversell themselves. Women are inclined to be much more accurate in their self-appraisals. And that, funnily enough, is a bit of a handicap. So that's one thing. Men are brilliant and boys are brilliant salesmen. And overconfidence buys you status and buys you the ability to persuade. A second reason is this, it's a much more primitive one, that if you show someone a face, someone they don't know, a face without any hair, just a face, and ask them to say, how likely is that person to win an election? Children will be 70% accurate just on the basis of seeing that face for less than a second. And it turns out that what they're doing is they're making a very primitive judgment of competence. And the awful penalty for women is that competence in a face and masculinity in a face are confounded in people's brains. So there's a tendency for people to think, oh, that face looks masculine, therefore it looks competent. Now, in women, attractiveness also, up to a point, increases the perception of competence. But for women, there's an upside down U-shaped curve. If they become too attractive, they look less competent. And these are primitive, largely unconscious processes in the brains. And they're, unfortunately, many of these processes are internalized in women's and girls' brains as much as they are in men's and boys' brains. So these are awful tidal waves of disadvantage that women have to struggle against. And they can struggle against them. But this confusion of competence and masculinity, what that does is it makes women feel less confident. And women on average do feel less confident than men. But actually, they're just more realistically confident, whereas men tend to be overconfident.
So actually, we talk in a study we did about the unentitled mindset that women have, which may in part reflect something of that feelings sort of under-skilled, under-resourced in that sort of judgment. And maybe it also tilts women to think more about how they look because they know it has an impact. So a fascinating concept that I'd never heard presented so clearly in science ever before.
It is so interesting, and women are right to be concerned about their appearance because what they're responding to are these primitive judgments in people's brains, and so women have to pay more attention to their appearance than men do, in order to try and navigate these conflicting forces. Because yes, women want to appear competent, but the risk is that if their behavior or their appearance becomes too masculine, then they become perceived as unattractive. They become perceived as aggressive. Things that they say or do, which would be acceptable in a man as seen as kind of healthy dominance, are seen as, as not attractive, negative aspects of behavior. So that's a big burden that women have to bear. And that makes it perfectly understandable that they're somewhat less confident than men.
Well, I could stay on that subject, but I know you have more jewels to communicate. So we're now going to move on to something that I hear a lot about, and we hear a lot about at the Female Lead, which is women and competition and, and also the way that they react to competition. And it has been said that women, because they don't like competition, won't take risks, which affects some of their employability status and opportunities. But please just talk to me about this whole area of competition.
Yeah, so yes, women are somewhat averse to competing, not particularly against men, but also to some extent against women as well. There's a well-known road race in California, the State Street Mile, where people can enter who are, good runners, and then they can also enter if they pass a certain time to a competition where there are large financial prizes. And women of a given athletic ability equivalent to that of men are much less likely to put themselves down for the big subsequent competition. Similarly, you do give a general knowledge quiz to male and female students. It's a study done in Cornell. And, the women scored about 7.5 out of 10, the men about 7 out of 10. But then you ask them, what do you think you scored? And the women think they scored 6.5 and the men think they scored 8.5. That's overconfidence. And then you say, look, we have a national competition. You can enter this big general knowledge competition. Many more of the men put themselves forward to that. So women tend to be competition averse, and that's largely because of confidence. It's largely because of confidence. However, if if they're competing on behalf of their children, they're just as competitive as men. So that tells us something about women's representation of themselves in their brains. So we live in a highly individualistic culture if we live in the West. And you can actually see this in the middle of the center of the brain. When you ask people to think about themselves, there's a particular area of the brain tends to light up. But in men's brains, that's reasonably isolated, this self-representation when they're thinking about themselves in the scanner. Women's is more embedded in relationships. Their self-concept is more embedded. They see themselves more in terms of, rather than being a sole trader, they're part of it's their relationships that define them. And what the effect of this means that men and women, when they're competing, are playing by different rules. Men have no trouble in dominating and beating a friend because that friend is not embedded in their self-concept in their brain the way a woman's is. A woman finds that it's much greater comfort being ruthlessly dominant. And so much of modern culture, it doesn't have to be like this, but so much of modern culture is individually competitive. And women are at a disadvantage in such situations. And we're going to be coming on to collective confidence later, which is a wonderful antidote to this. But that doesn't gainsay the fact that in a culture defined by men of highly aggressive, competitive, ruthless dominance, women are at a huge disadvantage. They find it anxiety provoking. They find they're fighting against themselves, whereas the boys are unfettered boy salesmen or men salesmen who are able to selfishly pursue their own brand and ruthlessly extinguish the competition, if you like, without feeling the same degree of personal discomfort that women do. Women are basically nicer people than men, I have to say.
You're being so hard on your whole sex, but we love it. We have felt for so long, what is wrong with us? And what you're basically saying so beautifully is they're just different rules. You know, we're judging and playing a different game. And I love the way that comes across in what you're saying and in your book. And it's really powerful and uplifting to the women that we talk to and who are engaged with us all over the world. Now, okay, we better move on to the third one, which is equally interesting. So here, Ian, you have talked about women's collective minds, the way that their thinking works collectively. And this is something, again, that we may suspect, but you have some really important facts around this that I'd love you to share.
Yeah, this is really important because we are a group species. We didn't really evolve to do this sole trader, highly individualistic. We evolved to work together in groups. And actually, I think there's good evidence that the women's brains are better able to do that. And the conclusion of my book is that we need many more women leaders in the world to address the enormous problems we're facing, precisely because of this quality. So let me give you one example, one study that was done to do with IQ, intelligence. So we all know about IQ tests and individual IQ tests. But there's also group IQ. So if you create a small group to solve IQ type problems together, you find that the intelligence of a group is largely uncorrelated with the average IQ of its members. So group IQ has its own dynamic. And so you ask yourself, well, what makes one group intelligent and the other group not, or less intelligent? It turns out there are three things. The first thing is just the sheer fairness of the allocation of time talking in the group. You don't have one person dominating, or you don't have one or two people speaking all the time and some people saying nothing. There's a relatively equal sharing of the speaking time in the solving the problem. The second is the average ability of the group members to read other people's emotional expressions in their faces. Okay? And thirdly is the proportion of women in the group. Now, that the women proportion factor is accounted for entirely by the accuracy of reading emotional expression. So what that tells us is, if you want an intelligent organization, an intelligent group, the last thing you want is some big, hairy, dominant, aggressive guy who's doing all the talking. No matter how smart he is, he will extinguish the intelligence of the group. So this self-representation of women, this more group representation of in their brains of themselves, this if you know what some ruthless males might see, this softer kind of sense, psychology, is actually a huge asset. It's a huge asset and has to be fostered. And I'll just finish off by saying that confidence, just like IQ, can be an emergent property of the group that's unrelated to the individual IQ, so you can get collective confidence of the group that's more than the sum of the individual confidences of the group. And we saw this in the midterm elections 2 years post-Trump's election, this enormous flourishing of political activity in the USA by women. Huge number of candidates. The biggest, I think it's never in history been seen such a rise in women's political activism. And that was collective confidence in action.
I love that. And honestly, if there was ever a reason that makes me feel the joy of collective voices and women in the female lead, that can make a difference, you've just said it.
And I have to say the female lead is such a brilliant idea, Edwina, because confidence is contagious. And confidence also is contagious, and the higher the status, the more the contagion. So your idea of disrupting the feed, of creating the feed of high influence, excellent exemplar women is such a, it's completely in accord with everything we know about the contagion of confidence.
Well, thank you so much. And I know you very kindly mentioned us in your new book, and we were so proud of that. And, the fact that we want to present data and evidence, you have helped with enormously. I'm super grateful for that. But let us now turn to the fourth and, again, very, very important dimension to what you've described. And this is really, in a sense, this is almost the culmination, I feel, of what you've talked about, which is this idea of committed action. And again, if you would just walk us through that, please.
Yeah, so let me quote the Persian Afghanistani poet, Rumi, a wonderful poet, who said, "The path only appears with the first step." What distinguishes confidence from optimism is its link to action. Optimism is the belief that things will turn out. It's different also from self-esteem. Self-esteem is your evaluation of yourself. Confidence is the belief that you can do something. So it's confidence is linked to action. That's its secret sauce. Because what confidence does is it projects you into the future and envisages a goal achieved. And the confidence is that fuel that links you from now to the future. And so confidence makes it easier for you to act, but it goes the other way round as well. That taking that step, taking that action, builds your confidence as well. In fact, one of the greatest sources of confidence is taking that action in spite of adversity, in spite of feeling anxious, in spite of feeling not quite ready. That mastering of adversity, of gritting your teeth and getting through it and doing it in spite of these feelings is a huge source of confidence, because confidence, its effects in the brain are a mini antidepressant and a mini anti-anxiety drug. So that's why committed action is so important. But here we have the challenge, because in life we have to oscillate between two mindsets. One is called the deliberative mindset, where we haven't selected a goal. We're doing the pros and cons of different courses of action. Will I change my job? Will I not? Will I enter that relationship? Will I not? Where will I move to? Will I move city? Will I change career? In that state of mind where you have not selected a goal, you're deliberating, your attention system is open and your memory system is open, and so you're more open to anxiety and doubts. That's called the deliberative mindset. We need to deliberate periodically. Any organization and individual does, otherwise we're stuck in one rut for our life. However, we need to be able to fairly often switch from the deliberative mindset to the implemental mindset, where we say, I have a goal, I've selected a goal, I'm going to go and study that course, or I'm going to move into that apartment. And the question then becomes the problem solving of how do I do that, all the practical problems. That does the opposite to the deliberative mindset. It narrows our attention and it protects us from anxiety because we're focused on future goals and anticipating future successes. And so the implemental mindset has been shown to raise confidence, particularly in women. And that's why it's so important that women are put in positions where they're having the power to implement. But what that means is sometimes we have to realize that the way we feel follows what we do as much as what we do depends on the way we feel. So action, committed action, doing stuff when you don't feel ready, in spite of anxiety. If you can do that, set goals for yourself, that's one of the greatest sources of confidence.
Do you know what? Saying women need to be put in positions where they have the power to implement, that is such an important statement. Really, really strong. And I think you quote Sheryl Sandberg, who basically said, you know, confidence and leaderships are like muscles. You learn to use them or not, yep. Which, you know, I really like. And, you know, and I think it plays to how you've just described this, which is you can use it and strengthen it and even share it, which, you know, is such a secret to the power we perhaps haven't unleashed yet sufficiently well. So that's exciting.
Confidence is a series of habits, a series of things a series of things we say to ourselves, a series of things we do, and a series of behaviors that we have. These can all be learned, so we can learn to be more confident.
Amazing, amazing. Well, look, I just want to say to everyone, I'm going to come to you in just a moment for just a few questions. Before I do, if I can just mention that, you know, Ian kindly mentioned that we have a campaign which is called Disrupt Your Feed, which is really aimed at helping people wean themselves off really toxic feeds of social media where the whole feed just becomes unrealistic, airbrushed celebrities, fashion icons, and we mix it up. We suggest different women to follow because we know that just a few of those women will start to give girls and women much better ideas of reality and what their future or their success could look like. So that inspiration helps them to create a plan which moves them forward. So do have a look at that on our website. And secondly, when we talk about fulfillment and happiness, we're really interested now in measuring how women deem themselves fulfilled in life and work. And, you know, what does this mean to them across a whole series of dimensions? You can go onto our website and you can do a survey that will take you 7 minutes. And it will help you to understand where you sit, where you are right now, and what you think is realistic for you to aim at in your future. And it will give you one of these fantastic personas. So do please have a look at that. And then you can look at lots of wonderful free advice and content. And we'll also have Ian's website on there as well, and his book, which is part of it. And you can access all of that. So that's part of us following through and giving you something to do following this conversation. So now this is your turn. It's your opportunity. We have time just for a few questions. So Lauren, are you able to, you've been doing all the magic behind the scenes. Have I given you time? Yes, Joy, lovely. What a lovely name for a question on this subject. Fantastic. How do you suggest to encourage myself to man up and go through something that I'm unfamiliar with? What a brave question.
Let's call it woman up. So what I was, supposing you're anxious about giving public presentations, and some people are I can remember being very anxious myself doing that. One of the best ways of dealing with a situation like that is not to think of the whole situation, but rather to visualize the individual steps you take towards the whole thing. So so supposing we're talking about the thing you're frightened about is doing a presentation to a board or something. Well, what you do is you visualize yourself. You first of all prepare very well, prepare your presentation, and you rehearse it many times. So you rehearse something so you no longer have to think about it when you do it. You visualize yourself standing tall outside the room where you're going in, if that's what you're doing, because a constricted posture, the tendency to constrict ourselves in times of anxiety, reduces our confidence. So just to stand tall and stand proud. And the other thing to do is to focus on, just to visualize yourself doing that. So to rehearse in your mind doing the thing you're frightened of doing, maybe a difficult conversation, who knows. The next thing is to make sure you're you're not breathing fast. So take a slow breath in for the count of 4. And out for the count of 6. Slow your breathing. It slows you down, makes it easier to think more clearly. You practice that in advance as well. You do this in advance, you do your breathing in advance. So you visualize the steps and you rehearse the steps multiple times towards going in. You say out loud the words you're going to say in that situation you're frightened of. So if it's a series of sub-goals that you practice and rehearse. And if you do that, that will slowly build your confidence, because rehearsing in your mind's eye the activities is equivalent to doing them in terms of the brain. And your brain will chalk up little senses of, yeah, you did that, got that, and that will slowly build up your confidence towards the big thing. One last thing, that anxiety you feel in your stomach, that breathing, you can control that with your breathing, but also if the symptoms of anxiety are identical to those of excitement. So if you say to yourself, I feel excited, that one word change makes you perform better, because you only know which emotion you're having by the context, and you can create that context with language.
That's amazing. You can almost trick your brain into saying, I'm feeling excitement rather than anxiety. Yeah, I mean, it's a good one to practice, I think, for sure. But I think we've all been in that moment of fear. Helen asks, I've got a 13-year-old daughter. What would be your one crucial piece of advice for her?
Values. Define who she is in terms of her values, and if she feels threatened or diminished or bullied, is to write down in a diary or in a piece of paper a few lines of who she is and what her values are. I'm a good person. I'm an honest person, I'm a hard worker. Reaffirming values gives you an incredible, and you can see this in brain imaging, protects your ego against the threat. And teenage girls, once they enter teenage world, the threats to their self-concept are so huge, particularly from the boy salesman, but also from other girls. So the values would be one thing. The second thing would be finding activities that she enjoys and getting that sense of accomplishment, whether it's in the arts, whether it's pottery or hockey or doing a film course, or getting something that where she feels a sense of accomplishment, of success, finding some route for her, musical instrument, singing, just finding something. And then the third thing is, don't be frightened of your child's failure. If you're fearful of your child's failure, that will communicate itself to them, even if you don't say it. That will give them what's called a fixed mindset about their abilities and make them terrified of failure and make them find a great difficulty in learning from failure. So this includes social failure, being rejected by other kids. So I talk to them about failure and say, you know, one of the things I learned in life, one of my biggest lessons for me was when I failed at that time. So not being frightened of your child's, oh, they're not academically very well, doing very well, or oh, they're not very popular. Embrace failure as a source of learning. So that's just 3 short tips.
Well, those are 3 as opposed to 1, but fantastic tips that I think can be most valuable. Do we have time for one more? Yes. How can I be confident without being arrogant?
The fact that you asked that question makes it very unlikely that you'll ever be arrogant. Arrogance leads to a diminished self-awareness. You're demonstrating self-awareness there. So what you have to do is to think Christine Lagarde, think Edwina Dunn, think confident women who are strong and confident but not arrogant. That's the least of your worries about being arrogant, and forget that risk. If you get there, that means you've done very well, and we'll deal with that. But arrogance is seldom a problem in women. It can be, but it's seldom a problem.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I think that's probably where we have to draw a line. Honestly, I could talk to you for another hour, but thank you to everyone out there. Thank you for asking your questions. This is Ian's website, where there is a lot of good free advice, and I would really encourage you to check it out. No worries. I like that. That's very street there, Ian. I really like that. But that is another resource that you can have a look at and learn from. And yeah, please don't forget that Ian's new book is out. It's called How Confidence Works. New Science of Self-Belief and Why Some People Learn It and Others Don't. And we've heard something about that. So I think we've had a little bit of a masterclass. I have enjoyed it so much. Have a look at Fulfilment Finder if you have time. We've given you a lot of actions, guys, but I hope you enjoy them. I hope you benefit from them. And it just leaves me to say a huge thank you to Ian, and for your brilliant thinking, for your life's work that finds you in this place right now. Awesome conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Edwina.